Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. From the right, I'm Gary Polland.
And from the left, I'm David Jones.
Tonight we welcome two exciting guests. Jeff Berg, host of Partisan Gridlock on KPFT FM 90.1. Jeff's also a practicing attorney, and David, I think he's a pretty good one. And Paul Betancourt, CEO of Betancourt Tax Advisors, the official tax advisor to David Jones, and the former tax assessor collector. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.
Unbelievable. Yeah. You guys can retire now.
Hey, with that type of media input, we could.
Oh, so
good endorsement. Thank you.
You were at one time our tax man, so we get to talk to you first about what's happening in Austin, Texas, where the governor of Texas, who is maybe leading us into some future that he hasn't shared with us yet,
the presidency
is telling us that we may or may not be able to use a $9 billion rainy fund to get us closer to balance. What do you think he's up to, Mr. Betancourt? Is this a bluff? Or is he just lying?
Okay, they're going to use part of the $9 billion fund, period. And I'll give you an example of why there's been a problem. If you look at how they forecasted the session on what type of revenues they were going to achieve during this biennium, somebody in state government decided that in a recession, property values would go up instead of down. And that was worth $2 billion right there. So they're clearly going to dip into the rainy day fund. The question is how much?
And what? Give us an idea about what the damage is going to do. Will be to the state of Texas if they only get to $2 or $3 billion in the rainy day fund, and the rest of it comes out of the, out of the heart and muscle of the state budget. What happens?
David, your assumption is wrong. Okay, Republicans got it under control. This is just like what happened in 2003. They are going to cut the budget. They'll probably end up with a rainy day fund. There'll be what was non-tax revenue, which is really a fee or a tax in some other name. And at the end of the day, sales receipts are already on the way up. So they'll make the cuts they need to, which my guess would be about $15 billion, not the 27 of the once that people want, but they'll be looking at about a $15 billion cut, bottom line.
Where are we headed if that happens, Mr. Berg?
Well, we're headed for disaster, which I guess is how the Republicans planned it. It is the Republicans that have been in charge of this for this entire period of time. The 2006 property tax issue, which many would argue caused this deficit, caused this problem, is of their own making. And it's incredible to hear Republicans who got us into this mess now describe how they want to get us out. I think we've had enough of the solution.
Well, but Jeff, I've got to add to this. First off, I was the tax assessor that stood up and said there's not a $2,000 check in everybody's mailbox in 2006.
That was the tax cut, property tax cut allegedly everybody got.
Right, but that subsidy has been very important by moving the burden of schools back off of the local taxpayers and put it on to the state where it belonged in the first place. Now, what's happening at this point is that just the same thing's going to happen that happened in 2003. There's going to be a deficit. They're going to make it up predominantly with cuts. There'll be rainy day fund income. And at the end of the day, this disaster that my Democrat colleagues here are predicting will be in the rearview mirror someplace unknown.
Yeah, like the teachers and the HIV victims who are going to be cut off of the public rolls, people who are going to lose out on what should be, frankly, their entitlement. People who depend on state funds, who the Republicans, as they've demonstrated time and again, couldn't care less about.
So he gets to tell us, since I'm assuming you're saying we need revenue, where are we going to get it?
Well, here's a novel idea, and I know this is going to come as a surprise to the anti-tax fetishists who sit next to us here at this table. The idea is that if you are going to spend money, you have to tax. If you like driving on roads, if you like having police protection, if you like having fire protection, if you like having nurses and teachers, you've got to have a tax system that pays for it. And we in this state don't tax corporations. We don't tax wealthy people. They get a free ride in this state, and everybody else has to pay for it.
But wait a minute, Jeff. They tax corporations. Clearly, that's what the business tax was all about. And
the gross receipts tax.
Right. And effectively, it's an income tax in any other name, except that it's on margin. Now, to your point about this revenue thing, I'll give you a perfect example. Health and Human Services head goes into the Senate Finance Committee. He's got 2,000 employees, and he walks in and says, the first thing I'm going to do is cut $1 million out of the child's autistic fund. And fortunately, Senator Patrick effectively said, don't come back. If you can't figure out your priorities here, don't come back, because he's got more in laps of employees, which is a technical term, sorry for the audience, but people that are not being hired, that he could pay for those important critical funds.
That's going to be quite comforting to the thousands of teachers that are going to be out of a job shortly, and people in nursing homes who are going to be overcrowded.
They're going to
feel
here's
great
the point.
about
Here's the
hearing
point.
that.
And you know, by the way, your nursing home point and add to that mental health are two very important things where we're being penny wise and pound foolish. We need to make sure that there's sufficient funds so our elderly get good care if they can't afford it, and we got to make sure the mentally ill get services, preferably outpatient, because they're cheaper. But here's what a budget crisis does. It's a good thing. It makes everybody, in theory, look at their budget, just like it would happen to individuals. You take a look, what is necessary, what's not necessary, and like Paul mentioned, priorities. What are the priorities and what are they not? And you know, Jeff, that's the problem in Austin. It's a problem generally with politicians. They don't want to establish priorities. They want to fund everything for everybody until money gets tight. So we need to go through that process first.
Well,
to add to your other point, you talk about our tax system, and I think everybody at this table agrees, we have a dysfunctional tax system. Everybody pays taxes, but some people get out of them. Some people have exemptions, right, like the natural gas producers. And
lawyers.
Lawyers don't pay sales tax. There's others. And our system is a mess and needs to be cleaned up. Does it bring in enough revenue for the state? I'm not sure what the state needs revenue-wise.
Maybe you can give Gary the date when the
state
state of Texas taxed and spent for everything that everybody wanted. Please give us. Tell us when that happened.
You know, one thing I can say, though, is that this program has its priorities. You both mentioned priorities. Has its priorities in much better shape than the legislature or the Governor Perry, because though we are talking at the beginning about this budget crisis because clearly it is the most important problem facing the state, that's not what the legislature and that's not what Governor Perry chose to declare emergencies. They instead chose to do things like this mythical voter fraud issue that doesn't exist. They went after the sonogram bill as emergencies, though the state was facing this massive budget shortfall. That's not what they chose to prioritize first.
Okay, now look, Jeffrey, you know that that's just a legislative term to get bills moving or not quickly. That's all that means. Now, the budget's going to be handled. In fact, this weekend is going to be the big budget debate on the floor of the House, interrupted by a funeral for one of the members' husbands. And they're going to be at it for 4 or 5 days. The budget will get passed. Now, let's talk about photo ID. 70% of Democrats want photo ID, 80% of independents want photo ID, 90% of Republicans want photo ID. It's going to pass. That debate's over with. And the sonogram bill, which is a good bill by Senator Patrick, which has bipartisan support, it certainly couldn't get out of the Senate without it. That's going to pass, and that will save lives.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Benford, on photo ID, and Jeff probably knows this too.
Children from being aborted.
Yeah, right.
I understand. In the last 15 years or so, we've had 50 million Texans vote, and only one person has been convicted of impersonating someone else at the ballot box. You were the registrar for many years when the DA of Harris County was a Republican. I don't remember anybody going to jail for any of this voter fraud business. So isn't this just a fiction in order for you to do whatever you want to control the numbers of people who come out to vote?
David, you're looking at the only voter registrar in Texas that I'm aware of that actually has a conviction on voter fraud, and that was in the 2000 presidential primary, and also
I'll give you my card.
election.
We'll try and get it overturned for you.
Yeah, that's right. Good.
Or maybe you meant something else.
No, I know. I've got 3 lawyers here, so if I'm not quite technically correct, give me a pass.
You weren't convicted, is what he said.
Yeah, that's right. I
Okay.
know. That's what I was trying to make a joke at. Now, all right, let's go to the simple point, which is people want to know that there's integrity at the ballot box. Everybody has a photo ID. In Mexico, actually, there's 95% compliance with photo ID. So we're just catching up with our neighbors, and we're going to have a photo ID bill, and that's the end of the debate.
Wasn't there a problem when you were a voter registrar about people registering multiple times, registering dead people, registering people that don't exist,
I had
registering their
Norwegian,
dogs?
by the way, I had Norwegian nationals voting in straight ticket Republican. I had Brazilian nationals voting straight ticket Democrat. We had people that we had, 50,000 deceased and felon voters.
Are college kids Republicans or Democrats? Because there was an
they're
amendment.
predominantly libertarian, David. But your point
there
is
was an amendment that would have allowed college kids to use a college ID in order to vote. No, we can't do that. There was an amendment that says let's allow people to register and vote on the same day. No, we can't do that.
Can we talk about what this really is?
Sure.
The statistics show, for example, from the Brennan Center for Justice at New York University, shows that the people who are going to be disproportionately, if you'll excuse me.
See, we're both having this problem. Go ahead.
I got to get it out. Disproportionately affected, negatively affected, are minorities and the elderly. That's just what the statistics show. In fact, in Ohio, where they're doing the same thing, the statistics show that up to 900,000 people will be disenfranchised by this voter ID law. Now, let's hold on.
By the way, I don't know about that report in Ohio, but right across the border in Indiana, after they passed the photo ID bill in 2008, all turnout for all minority groups has escalated, and there was no disenfranchisement. It's a myth.
It's not a myth.
And by the way, if you don't have a photo ID, what we should do is put people in vans, drive to you, and give you the...
As David pointed out,
this
is a solution in search of a problem. There is no voter impersonation going on. What this does is...
You don't know, Jeff.
Of course.
You don't know.
Of course, because we know there's been one conviction out of 50 million. But I will tell you a voter fraud problem that does exist, that you Republicans have chosen to completely ignore, and for obvious reasons.
Please.
Here it is. I don't know that your cameras can pick this up.
I'm sure they can.
I've not heard one Republican mention this, but in every election year, in African-American communities, fraudulent flyers like this are passed out by conservatives, by conservative groups or conservative individuals.
Oh, Jeff, you have absolutely no proof of that.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Well, what is this in my hand?
You don't know who's passing these things out. For all we know, this is Soros passing this out to raise it.
It's a conspiracy. It's a huge conspiracy.
How do we know? You don't have any proof. Don't go on
wait a minute.
A reputable show.
No. Let's address that for a minute. I have no proof that this was passed out by conservatives.
Right.
You have no proof whatsoever that voter impersonation occurs, and yet you want to force something that will it is statistically proven will disenfranchise minority and elderly voters.
You're making a mistake because you don't know who you're talking to. I testified in the National Congress.
What are you going to do about this?
In 2006, I'll get to that in a second. I also testified in the state legislature in 2008, and we brought to them 300. I'm going from memory, 18. Voter fraud cases that were ironclad and presented in the evidence into the House Elections Committee. Now, in any case, what you have is that data is real, it's on record, and that's why you need a photo ID bill. Plus, the real problem, what you really need is a national photo ID card, citizenship list.
Talk to Ron Paul about that. And
if you had that, all this would be a moot point.
Well, let me ask you this, Paul, because here's what Jeff is referring to, and that is the disaster that's coming your way. He's warning you, is what he is. The disaster is coming your way as a Republican. If Hispanics continue to get the message that you don't want them to participate and you don't want them to vote, now that they are at 50 million in the United States and the largest growing Hispanic populations
Where do you get these assumptions, David?
Are in states that John McCain won, but he only got 31% of Hispanic votes. Seven states with 150 electoral votes are at stake here, and you're driving a heart in the voting strength of Hispanic voters.
David, did you just miss the entire 2010 election cycle? Okay, who's in charge of the U.S. House of Representatives right now?
Republicans.
Right. Overwhelming sweep, okay? Biggest sweep since the 1920s.
Well, and wait,
okay?
how about
now, by the way, how many elected state representatives in Texas are Republican? 101, highest number ever.
How many are Hispanic?
Right. Certainly the highest number that we've had.
How many
about
2008 Obama voters didn't show up? 29 million.
Well, that's because
they didn't have IDs. That's why.
So, David, whatever you think this disaster,
if you guys have your way,
California,
whatever disaster you and Jeff think is happening in the Republican Party here in Texas in the United States, there's no anecdotal evidence that you're right. Well, we're on a roll. I hate to tell you that.
I think there's a state called California where it was demonstrated Hispanics, and they haven't gone Republican in 20 years.
This is a demographic. This is driven in large part, first of all, primarily by politics, obviously, but by demographics. Republicans know that this state, since we're talking about Texas, is going to be more Hispanic, more African American, and they've not done a good job of reaching out to those communities. And this voter ID bill and this denial of the actual types of voter fraud that goes on is nothing but an attempt to protect their majority that they know demographically is going to disappear in the future. Because listen to the arguments. Do you hear anything that would substantiate the need for a photo ID?
Well,
nothing.
You did,
it doesn't
because Paul
exist.
told you They had 320 cases of
voter
fraud. Now, or voter impersonation. Now, what happened doesn't mean they can necessarily get the DA to prosecute. That's a whole different issue. But I wanted to respond to you on where the Republican Party is with Hispanics. We are in better shape with the Hispanic community in Texas and around the country than we have been in a long, long time, because we've reached out to Hispanics, because Hispanics share a lot of the Republican values.
No question.
Work hard, religion.
Oh, no,
So
don't get me wrong.
We elected
all
two.
the demographics I know in the state of Texas are the state is trending more Republican and more Hispanic. And
don't
that's
get
what
me
the trends
wrong.
are.
I actually believe that Republicans could make great inroads in the Hispanic community. They could make great inroads in the Jewish community, in the gay community. The problem is that Republican politics, not necessarily policy, not always policy, but politics, compels Republican politicians to attack Hispanics, to attack gays, to attack people who are not just... Name
one.
Well, let's talk about the priorities.
Let's start with...
name one in Texas, in Houston, Texas, that is doing that right now, Jeff.
That is doing what?
Name one Republican politician in Houston, Texas that is attacking Hispanics and attacking gays.
Sure, Debbie Riddle.
Oh, just because Debbie's for...
Do you want me to tell you what she said on my show in order to prove that?
Okay.
You asked me the question.
Please go ahead.
Okay.
I'll take you as an authority of your own show.
I had Debbie Riddle on my show, and I asked her when she was proposing Arizona-style border laws here in Texas, I asked her why it is she thought that minority communities, people of color, didn't support that kind of thing. And her response, which you're welcome to go on the internet and check out, was, it's because their leaders are used to entitlements.
Okay, but that's Jeff. Paul, you hit the zero meter on the test right there.
We have
because
social
talking
issues,
about
Paul.
entitlements is not somebody that's attacking somebody either racially on a profile.
Go out there and ask
I
any
understand-
African American or Hispanic if they feel attacked by a
I
statement
understand
like that.
the need for debate. However, we do have the matter of whether or not we're on another social issue headed towards South Dakota. And whether or not it's also part of the Republican agenda to do everything they can to discourage women from having full lives because of their loss of rights in contraception and the like. 3-day waiting periods, mandatory sonograms. I mean, is this where you want to be going, Paul, on that issue?
Absolutely. The Catholic Church and many other respected institutions are for these bills. What you're finding is a drive to respect life. And that's important because Senator Patrick's bill will save lives, period.
Whose lives?
The lives of children that are unborn. And that's a great, noble purpose. The society has gone way too far down the path of disrespecting human life, and this bill is going to pass, and future generations are going to count themselves lucky because they're going to be born as opposed to being aborted and killed.
Did you see this quote, Jeff? That the sponsor of the bill, that mandatory 3-day wait in South Dakota, says women need to be reminded of the natural relationship between them and their children. Is that what this is all about?
Well, you don't even have to go that far. You can look at what Dan Patrick said here in Texas. He said that this sonogram bill is about informing women, giving them all the information they need because, I guess, according to the extreme right wing, women are just too stupid to know what an abortion is. And if you'll... Yeah, I mean, I guess Gary agrees. But look, let's look at this from another point of view. Whether you like it or not, abortion is a constitutional right in this country. Just like, for example, the right to keep and bear arms is an individual right,
yes.
which was hold on. Let me just finish this point.
What
let me,
Constitution are you reading? The one that has the Bill of Rights that says right to bear arms. Okay, that's a good one. Where is the amendment that says that an abortion is legal in the Bill of Rights or any other amendment?
It's actually, and I think that the lawyers here will be able to confirm for me that the Supreme Court's holding in Roe versus Wade.
It is a decision by the Supreme Court.
If you don't mind.
Okay.
Roe versus Wade recognized that under the right to privacy, women have a right to an abortion. Now,
so now how does the sonogram bill that Senator Patrick have, how is that bad then?
If you'll let me finish my point,
please.
I think I'll be able to get to it. The Second Amendment, which the Supreme Court recently recognized, contains an individual right to bear arms, which is not in the Constitution. What if you proposed an amendment here in Texas that said, oh, you know what, we want to save children. How about one of the thousands of children that are killed every year by firearms? Let's make anybody who wants to buy a firearm look at the picture of a dead child who was killed by a firearm accidentally. How would the right wing feel about that?
I don't know, but I like that idea.
Yeah, well, I think you ought to propose it because I think it'll help kill the Democrats politically. Let me take this, Paul. Here's what it is. What everything that Texas passes within the confines of Supreme Court ruling in Roe versus Wade. All these things are allowed. So a sonogram is allowed for the mother to know what she's about to do. So
allowed,
she has an intelligent,
but not forced.
so she can make an intelligent decision.
Because she's not intelligent enough to
It's a
figure it
child,
out?
not a choice.
That's your opinion.
Okay, but
well, that's a fact.
But wait a minute.
Well, not according to the constitutional jurisprudence of this country.
What is wrong with showing the picture of a live child in their mother's womb? What's wrong with that?
I thought Republicans didn't want to come between doctors and patients. That's what we heard during the healthcare debate.
What's wrong with showing the picture of a live child in
because
the
it's
mother's
none of your
womb?
business. It's not your business. It's between the patient and the doctor. It has nothing to do with you.
Well,
you
cite move on.
Sorry, I'm
going
to make a prediction. That bill is going to pass. It's going to pass both houses, and it's going to be signed into law.
And
There's
it'll
no question
challenge
of
the
it.
courts, and we'll see what happens.
And children will be here that would not be here before.
That's correct.
And they'll be here, and they'll be.
What about the
there'll be an
children?
increasingly larger classroom as a result of.
Now,
let's
to
talk-
education.
Let's talk about. Let's talk about. We talked about the budget, the issues, and where we're going. But I want to throw out one thought, one topic area is our tax system. Paul, your take: does this tax system in Texas work for the 21st century? Are we bringing in enough revenue in a fair and equitable basis? I mean, for all the people, based on, because I know you've been a crusader against high property taxes.
We have an over-reliance on high property taxes. Okay, so the only way to control that is by reduced spending or by shifting that burden to more sales tax related type of receipts
Or wealth.
Right.
So do you think?
wealth?
So do you think an idea that should be
corporations?
David, you're already paying a wealth tax because I happen to know about your house. You're paying 2.5% on your house every year.
There are five
That's a wealth tax. That's what the property
you're
tax
talking
is.
about-
There are five states. There are 5 states
Okay.
that have taxes on wealth, and their per capita income and their wealth per capita is far greater than us, we Texans who claim to have such a great state.
But my question was, as you mentioned sales tax, this is for both of you, so do you think that maybe Texas should take a look at how we charge the sales tax and whether we should start limiting the exemptions? I mean, Chairman Chiflin had that proposal.
I'll let
Broad
Jeff have it.
sales tax,
In a
lower
second.
the rate, more revenue.
All right, but the bottom line to me is government can't forecast its way out of a paper bag. Part of the problem is that government, even in Texas, even the comptroller's office said, we're going to have increased property tax revenues going up all the way through a recession. That cost them $2 billion on a misforecast. Government has to understand that there are business cycles and they have to forecast sales tax revenue the same way. They haven't been able to do it, and that's a big part of the hole they're in right now.
Yeah, I think that there's probably one point on which Paul and I can certainly agree, probably everybody at this table agree. You just can't spend more than you take in. It's just, you cannot do that. And the state has a desperately unfair system of taxation in which the wealthy are permitted to get away with state services, taking advantage of state services that they don't pay their fair share for.
All right.
And it's sort of in that case very similar to Wisconsin and now Ohio and Michigan.
At least the state is trying to exempt the people that can't pay from the drainage tax locally, and Senator Patrick is trying to get that bill through so that we've got hard-pressed charities, churches, and schools that shouldn't be paying this tax because HISD and Spring Branch would have to lay off about 60 teachers to pay that drainage fee.
Or 20
and Mayor Parker
administrators.
needs to understand that bill is going to pass this legislative session as well.
Paul just got us into politics.
He did. Well, let's talk about politics. I know you both love that. Let's tied to the legislative session. Has all the political chairs are shifting? Kay Hutchinson leaving, a Senate race, and the like.
The musical chairs haven't even started yet.
Yes, but has that affected what's going on in Austin this time? In your opinions?
It's triple witching hour. It's a big budget year. It's a redistricting year, and of course, there's always politics after the session. Jeff.
Yeah, I could not agree more. It's and in my view, a lot of the things that the Republicans made priorities this year are geared toward politics. And Paul is right, of course, that we are going to get to the budget. but making those social issues priorities really appeal to the Republican base. And so, of course, there's tons of politics going on in the Republican Party.
They'll get their day job done. They'll pass a budget. That's what this weekend's all
Paul,
about.
you talked about the Republican base. The Republican base doesn't support throwing grandma out of the nursing home, doesn't support having no treatment for the mentally ill.
They don't support
ludicrous.
having the Health and Human Services Department head walk in and say, let's cut the $1 million out of the Autistic Children's Fund. And I was proud of Senator Patrick and I think Senator Huffman. They just basically threw the guy out of the hearing and said, don't come back until you have a better solution.
Okay, Senate. So for the Democrats, Jeff, you've been involved in a draft campaign to find a star to run for the Democrats. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, here's another point on which everybody at this table is going to agree, and that is that the Democrats have not got a chance in hell of winning the 2012 Senate election. Are we all agreed?
Bingo.
We're all agreed on that.
So your candidate is?
My candidate, because I thought, and I thought about this, and I thought, who is a Democrat who's got name recognition, positive name recognition, that even a Republican like Paul would hear his name and think, I like that guy. Tommy Lee Jones.
Men in Black 3. We got to go see it.
I am dead serious about this issue. Tommy Lee Jones is a cum laude graduate of Harvard University. He went there on a scholarship. Very smart, successful businessman, runs a cattle ranch. And I just don't know of another Democrat who would have even an inkling of a shot.
Well, his name is Jones. His name is Jones, and I'm not optimistic for it. Thanks to all of you for being here, and thank you for watching. We invite you to visit our home online at HoustonPBS.org. Click on the local program bar at red, white, and blue about our guests, watch the shows, and until next time, get informed and get active.